Whilst as a child, I believe that I was shown the treacle mines in Wem, but I certainly do recall there being coal mines in St Martin's near Oswestry. I remember very well the Cranville pit in Telford. I also recall the construction of Telford and not realising that the massive quantities of black soil being removed were actually open cast mining, preparing the land for the new town, especially around what is now the centre and along the M54. Or at least I don't recall the significance of mining remediation and coal reclamation in supporting the new town's development. Indeed, I also recall minibuses full of miners on the A5 between the East Shropshire and South Staffordshire. That is Cannock pits. There are in fact 4 coalfields in Shropshire: the Denby field, which stretched from Chirk to below Oswestry; the Shrewsbury field, which included the towns of Shrewsbury, Hanwood, Cruckmeal, Condover, Leebotwood, Pontesbury and Westbury; the Coalbrookdale field, which focused on Arleston, Dawley and Madeley but ran to Oakengates; the South Shropshire field around Highley and the Clee Hill, but running into the Wyre Forest. At its peak in 1871, the Shropshire coalfield was producing 1.37 million tonnes per annum. Indeed, prior to this, Shropshire had been the second most important coal mining area in Britain. Now, this vlog focuses on the Shropshire Unitary Authority, and I will issue a separate one for Telford. The Denbighshire coalfield ran from Chirk into North Shropshire and included Oswestry and beyond. Trevonnan and the Morda area to the southwest of Oswestry had become important in coal production from around 1750. First of all, bell pits, and then more developed shaft and tunnel workings were used to extract rather poor quality coal from thin seams. Indeed, bell pits were common in the early days. Bell pits were common across all of the Shropshire fields, as were often poor quality coals and thin seams. However, the clay dug out as a byproduct was used locally for making bricks and pottery items. There were at least 23 pits in the area, with the drill, also known as the Gronwen pit, at Morda being particularly productive, employing 100 colliers. Earlier on, Coed Gore pit near Morda fed the nearby brickworks. Other pits included the Sweeney on the Sweeney estate and Clin Amapis. In 1813, the Morda tramway was laid down to transport coal to the canal at Myesbury. In 1860, local entrepreneur Thomas Saving constructed a railway to link the Morda pits to the main line of the Cambrian Railway at Whitehaven near Knocklas. The railway opened in 1861, but Saving's bankruptcy in 1866 ended things, and his mine was closed in 1869. The old, I think it's probably pronounced Ivel, but it might be Eiffel, in Trevonnan, and the Hen and Chickens in Morda, and were noted as places where chartermasters would pay colliers, often in beer. And now this indicates that it was the long wall method of mining that was used, which allowed, so in other words, the seam was cut along its length, allowing for supervision or chartermasters, which was open to abuse, such as paying them in beer. Mining in this area had ceased by 1891 with the closure of the Trevonnan pit. Western Ryn and Priest Green to the north of Oswestry also had a number of pits, adjacent to those in Chirk, including the Quinter quarry. It was also where coal from St Martin's was sent to join the main railway line. The village of St Martin's to the north of Oswestry grew up around now I'm not sure if I should pronounce it Ifton or the Ivdon colliery, even though I know it. And it was once the largest coal mine in Shropshire. I'm going to call it Ifton. The Ifton colliery was sunk in 1913 and went into full production in 1921. It was linked underground to the Bryn Kinlet and Blackpark pits. Originally sunk in the 19th century, the pit employed more than 1,300 colliers at its peak, but closed in 1968 due to underground fire problems and loss of its markets. An accident on the 14th of July 1874 killed a miner as a result of a roof fall. Other pits in the area included Chirk Bank, Coedal Aralt, of Lannog, Morton Hall, Priest Green, or Lodge as it was also known. And there's actually still a miners' club building in St Martin's, which was built in 1932, on the main road running through the village, which is also known as Colliery Road. Now, the Shrewsbury coalfield ran from Hormond in the north to Leebotwood in the south, Worthing in the west to Drayton just east of Cund. And many of the villages to the south and southwest of Shrewsbury housed miners, and the initial growth of some like Baston Hill was due to migration of workers to the area. Pits included Astley, Baston Hill, Longdon, the Black Lion, Meal, Nobold, Sutton, Wellbatch, and that was between Hookergate and Anscroft. The Pontesbury coalfield included the Pontesford pit, the Nag's Head pit, Malehurst colliery and the Arscott pit, which was really part of the Hanwood coalfield. There was also a Westbury colliery in Westbury, Astley and Farley collieries in Astley. A colliery at Arscott, Coppice, had been established by 1769, and in the 19th century had 3 shafts. There was also a brickworks near Arscott Hall. There were shafts near Mothall linked by a tramway to the Shrewsbury Road at Anscroft. A field ran through retinal pits in the Condover and Leebotwood area, cutting through Longno, which has had a number of small pits itself. There are also several old shafts around Cruckton, Cruckmeal and Lear Cross area, adjacent to the Hanwood coalfield, including the Cruckmeal pit and the Short Hill pit. By 1921, all had closed apart from the Hanwood coalfield, which produced household and steam-raising coal to serve the local market, and sometimes beyond until closure in 1941. Woodhall was one of the pits in Hanwood, whilst Mothall had a dedicated tramway and more than one shaft with underground works that ultimately linked to Hanwood Colliery. Apparently it closed when use pulling the sleds saved enough money to purchase motorcycles and therefore access better paid work outside Hanwood. Although these would have provided domestic coal for local use, much of the output was used for driving steam engines, particularly in the Stiperstone's lead mines. On the 3rd of June 1920, a miner was killed at Mothall following a roof fall. There was a cluster of mine workings around Highley, the Clee Hills and the Wyre Forest. The pits of the Clee Hill and South Shropshire largely served industrial consumers in the neighbouring Black Country, especially after the opening of the Ditton Priors Railway. And now there's evidence of 2,000 mine workings on the Clee Hills, I find this hard to believe, but as much of the coal was near the surface, maybe we're talking of very small bell pits here, rather than deep mines. In 1973, a programme was undertaken to assess the viability of coal measures on the Clee Hill for the production of lightweight aggregates. This programme was initiated because virtually all remaining, albeit substantial, planned development of dolerite was overlaid by a considerable thickness of coal measures and glacial deposits. A negotiation with the open cast executives of British Coal culminated in granting a licence to work both British Coal vested and ARC alienated coal. Coal mining was commenced in October 1988. The mining phase and major restoration work was completed in July 1992, the project being abandoned eventually for commercial reasons. Now, the Wyre Forest coalfield was a part of the Hales Owen Formation in Shropshire. The Severn Valley Mineral Company Limited was formed to exploit the deposits on the Billingsley estate. The Billingsley colliery began during the late 18th century, almost 100 years before Highley itself, but the number of companies successively failed to make a go of the venture. In 1910, the Billingsley Colliery Company was formed to buy the colliery, and in 1915 the colliery was sold to the Highley Mining Company. The government increased its control over the mines during the First World War, and while under government control, hours, wages and safety improved. By 1921 there were 250 employed at Billingsley. Lloyd George's decision to return the mines to their original owners in 1921, with likely reversal of these benefits, brought about a miners' strike and the mine closed. Kinlet Colliery was built by the Highley Mining Company. The site had no road access, so the mining leases granted by the Kinlet estate of William Lackenchild also made provision for a railway connection, and a short branch was taken off the Severn Valley Railway around 1900. Production at the Kinlet Colliery started in 1890, but the mine proved difficult to work due to basalt rock affecting the only seam to produce coal. The colliery did employ around 150 men by the turn of the century, rising to around 300 by the start of the First World War, by which time the annual output was about 50,000 tonnes. The colliery was abandoned in September 1937, when the leases on the Kinlet estate expired. Coal extraction began at Highley in the late 1870s. By 1900, around 240 men and boys were employed by the sidings. And sidings were built alongside the Severn Valley Railway south of Highley Station. Mainline railway trucks were filled with coal at the colliery and ran down a standard gauge incline to the sidings to be taken to the carpet factories of Kidderminster. In the centre of Highley is the recreation ground, now home to the Severn Centre. Until 2005, this was the site of the Welfare Hall. The Rec and the Welfare Hall are a legacy of the local mining industry. The Highley Mining Company ran the colliery successfully for many years, with the workforce increasing to 670 by 1937. As the working moved under the River Severn towards Alveley, a new shift was opened in Alveley. Once the Alveley and Highley workings had joined in 1937, men and equipment were transferred to Alveley, and by 1940 Highley Colliery itself had closed, although the pithead remained open for ventilation. The shaft at Alveley was sunk in 1935 to a depth of 360 yards by the Highley Mining Company, and was connected to the workings from their Highley shaft, which had proceeded under the river by this point. Initial work was completed in 1937 and production started in 1938. The workings were very modern, with full use being made of electric power, including mechanical working of the coal face. Coal was brought across the river by a rope-worked tramway across a bridge built to serve the mine, which was later replaced by an aerial roadway in 1961. This served the washeries and sidings, and the latter now being the location of Country Park Cart Halt. Production was fairly consistent, reaching a full output in 1944 with 275,000 tonnes raised, and with a year's record being 5,547 tonnes in a week and a peak of 300,000 tonnes per year, reached in the late 1950s. The colliery became a part of the National Coal Board, NCB, on nationalisation in 1947. At the time, employment was 741, rising to 1,250 in the mid-1950s, and falling to around 700 by the mine's closure. A major expansion was undertaken in the late 1950s and early 1960s, completed in 1962, after large coal reserves of coal were found to the east of the current workings. These were purported to be enough to last the mine for between 50 and 100 years. But a drop in the quality of coal, combined with a reduction in demand due to national oversupply, forced the closure of the mine in 1969, with the last coal being lifted on the 31st of January.